In the heart of Montana's dense, snow-blanketed forests, a man named Caleb lived a life of quiet solitude. The towering pines whispered secrets only the wind could understand, and his log cabin stood like a lone sentinel in the wilderness. Caleb was a lumberjack, strong, steady, and silent, but behind his rugged hands and calloused palms was a soul burdened by sorrow. For 10 winters, he had endured the biting cold not just of the season, but of loneliness. He had once known love, laughter, and the warmth of companionship, but time and tragedy had stripped all of that away. Now, the only sound in his cabin came from the crackling fire and the slow creak of old wooden floors. Each night, after his hard day's work felling trees and stacking logs, Caleb sat by the fire, staring into the flames like they held answers. In those quiet moments, he folded his hands and prayed, not for gold, not for comfort, but for someone. Someone to talk to. Someone who would care that he came home. God, he would whisper with eyes closed tight, I don't need riches. Just someone to share this life with. It was a simple plea, but it came from the deepest part of him. He didn't know if anyone heard it. He didn't know if anything would ever change. But still, he prayed. And in the silence of the forest, that hope, however faint, burned brighter than any flame in his hearth. One icy morning, as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, Caleb heard the unfamiliar crunch of footsteps outside his cabin. Rarely did anyone venture this deep into the woods. He opened the door cautiously and found a gaunt, ragged man standing there, his eyes wild with desperation. Behind him stood a young woman, no older than 20, wrapped in a tattered shawl, her eyes cast to the ground. The man introduced himself as a trader from a struggling village far beyond the ridge. With a trembling voice, he explained his situation. Famine had struck, debts had mounted, and in a moment of despair, he had decided to do the unthinkable. He was offering his daughter in exchange for food, shelter, and a small sum of money. Caleb's face tightened in disbelief. She's not for sale, the man insisted coldly. She's just a burden now. Caleb looked at the girl, thin, silent, her hands clenched tightly around her arms, as if she were trying to hold herself together. She didn't beg, didn't cry, just stood there, still as stone, as though life had already taught her that hope was dangerous. Caleb's heart twisted. He couldn't accept her as property. But he also couldn't let her go back to the man who saw her as something to trade. After a long silence, he nodded. She can stay here. But not as something bought. As someone free. Without a word, he took her hand, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't pull away. The days that followed were quiet, heavy with unspoken words. Anna, she had whispered her name once. Rarely spoke and never smiled. She moved through the cabin like a shadow, doing small chores without being asked, her eyes always downcast. Caleb didn't press her with questions. He simply gave her space and tried to make her feel safe. He chopped extra wood so the cabin would stay warm. He cooked simple meals and always left a portion aside for her, gently knocking on her door before leaving the plate. He carved her a small wooden angel from pine, sanding it smooth, and left it by her bedside one evening. It was his quiet way of saying, "You're not alone anymore." She found it the next morning and stared at it for a long time. She didn't say a word, but that night, for the first time, Caleb heard humming from the kitchen as she stirred a pot of stew. It was soft and uncertain, but it was music nonetheless. As winter deepened, so did their bond. They spoke in short, simple sentences at first, about the snow, the firewood, the animals that wandered near the cabin. Then one day, Anna laughed. It was quick and small, but it stopped Caleb in his tracks. He looked up from his work and saw her watching him, a flicker of light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Without realizing it, their silence had turned into comfort. Their pain, slowly, into healing. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled low, Anna sat across from Caleb at the wooden table, her hands wrapped around a warm mug. Her eyes were distant, heavy with something she had held inside for too long. Caleb noticed the change in her expression, like a storm gathering behind calm skies. "I need to tell you something," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb nodded, setting down his cup. He didn't speak, just waited. "My father didn't just sell me because he was hungry," she began, eyes fixed on the flickering flame. "He found out I was pregnant. The man who hurt me left long ago. My father said no man would want a woman carrying someone else's child. He said I was worthless now." The words hung in the room like smoke, bitter and suffocating. Caleb didn't move. Not in shock, but in quiet understanding. His heart ached for her, not just because of what had happened, but because of how long she had carried this pain in silence. She looked up, bracing for judgment or rejection. But Caleb's eyes only softened. He stood slowly, came around the table, and knelt beside her. "You're not worthless, Anna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That child might just be the miracle I've been praying for." Her lips trembled. She didn't know whether to cry or breathe. But in that moment, something inside her broke open, not in pain, but in relief. She was no longer alone. Spring arrived like a quiet promise, melting the snow and breathing color back into the forest. Birds returned to the trees, wildflowers peeked through the thawing earth, and the once silent cabin now pulsed with gentle life. Inside, the air was filled with warmth, not just from the fire, but from something deeper. Anna went into labor just before dawn, her face pale but determined. Caleb stayed by her side the entire time, his hands trembling but steady, whispering words of comfort he never knew he had in him. Hours later, as the sun broke over the trees, the cabin echoed with the first cries of a newborn baby boy. Tears streamed down Caleb's face as he held the child in his arms. He was tiny, wrapped in a soft blanket Anna had stitched weeks before, his eyes squinting at the light of a world that had once seemed so cruel. Caleb looked from the baby to Anna, who was exhausted but smiling, her eyes full of something new, peace. "I never thought I'd have this," Caleb whispered, voice breaking. "A family." Anna reached out and took his hand. "Neither did I." Caleb had prayed for someone to share his life with, and in a way only fate could write, he had received not just a companion, but a son. A second chance. A home filled with laughter and love. In the heart of the woods, where only silence once lived, 3 souls, scarred, mended, and whole, had found the miracle they never saw coming.